Hey Leo,
Alex.
hey, nice to see you and a happy new year.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, we are not quite there yet, but I think you guys at home are.
Yeah, that's right. We are recording this in the end of December, but this episode is coming out, at the first in January. And so I hope you all viewers at home have a nice new year and that you are now listening to why Yu-Gi-Oh stands strong in this new era of TCGs. And Leo, this is kind of a spicy topic, but tell us like why are you the right person to talk about this?
I mean, I've been playing Yu-Gi-Oh for basically all my life. I started when I was even a little bit younger than 6 years old, and I'm still standing strong. I was a national champion at one point, and I am now for multiple years a commentator of the official big tournaments of the YCSs, of European Championships, and nationals of all sorts.
Yeah, we also met through this game. I remember it vividly. Yu-Gi-Oh still has a big, part in my heart, and I remember a lot of great moments with you together. And I also play the game myself from time to time, though a little bit more casual. And I'm very like interested now to not only hear, you casting for Yu-Gi-Oh, but you're also casting for other games, right?
Yeah, I also do, for example, Pokemon Go, which also, I mean, you can see in my interior design that I like the best of both worlds there. Those are at the moment the only games I cast officially, but yeah, they both have a special place in my heart. I also play other games as well, so let's see where the future leads us.
Yeah, that's right. It's pretty exciting to see where this year leads and where the TCG world is going because there are a lot of new TCGs out there and also a lot of TCGs that are now going in their competitive year. Lorcana, for example, had their start in the last year, but now it's the first year for their World Championship. Star Wars Unlimited also goes in, pretty important year. One Piece as well, but there are also like very new games coming out that are not really released yet, like the Project K from Riot, for example, or Gundam TCG. And so, are there any like games that you are following along and that you are excited about?
So I've been a huge fan of Legends of Runeterra, the Riot computer card game, basically digital card game is I think the right term. Even though I've never heard anyone say DCG, so maybe that's not the thing. But I mean, I love that game. I've played like the top 700 Europe qualifier 3 times in a row until I stopped at some point. Never made it to top 32, always lost in the bubble, but I can't wait to play new Riot games, League of Legends based card games. So I'm very much looking forward for that.
Yeah. So I think it's pretty nice to see that not only Yu-Gi-Oh as one of the big three is still thriving, but people nowadays have the option to play multiple games. And if they don't like one of the big three, they can just change up and find one
Yeah.
of those new games and find basically something to enjoy. So we will not only talk about like Yu-Gi-Oh in comparison to these new TCGs, but talk about the main points like why Yu-Gi-Oh is still one of those big three, and also what are the important parts about playing Yu-Gi-Oh today. And we want to start with not only talking about like the recap of 2024 in Yu-Gi-Oh, but also talk about some of the points that go along in this new year. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about this recap of 2024 with like what are the biggest tournaments, for example.
Yeah, so we've had a long year that started off pretty strong with the introduction of a new deck called Snake Eyes. So Snake Eyes basically was released December 2023, if I'm not mistaken. There we had like the base of the archetype, and then in the beginning of this year, with the Age of Overlord, with the new and newer set back then, Snake Eyes Poplar was released, a card that completely broke the deck, and that basically almost made it a tier 0 deck up until last month. So we have had a very long year of summoning Snake Eye monsters. There were also some other decks in competition, and while there were some differences in how the deck played over the year, there were similar combos for a long time in the game, and I think that also led to to some people complaining about the state of the game. So there were many things happening. There was also growing in the Time Wizard community again. So this is something that is very still a bit surprising to me. That I mean, I am a Time Wizard player. I played this before it was an official format and played Gold and Edison, or 2005 and 2010. And people just start playing now, and they're picking up Time Wizard cards. It's actually amazing. The game is so good that people still are finding their ways into it. And I mean, look at this. This is 2010 format Dragons, and they came out in 2008, I think. Some in 2009. But this community was growing. Then we had some ups and downs in attendance numbers in the big tournaments, which also were some other issues. But now we just had the German Open 1 week ago, and we hit 701 players for a regional. So that's pretty huge. We have a new set, and that is going to dictate how the game is going the next year, I think. So it is looking very strong. The players ended the year very, very satisfied, I want to say. So that's a good thing. It's a good outlook.
So when we are talking about those bigger tournaments in Yu-Gi-Oh, we will not only talk about the YCS, but we will also talk in more depth about the World Championship, because that is really the pinnacle of Yu-Gi-Oh, right? And not only with like the physical TCG, but also with Master Duel. So we will also touch on that later. But before we come to that, maybe you can like talk a little bit more about this player attendance, because I remember we also did an interview a while back, and there was a huge attendance at YCS back then. Is it still like this, that like thousands of players come to the YCSs?
Yeah, so we had one attendance drop, which was 1,800 player YCS, but that was also because the venue just wasn't that big. So I think there was a cap of 2,000 players or something, and then something else came up. I don't quite remember what it was, so I'm not going to go too big into detail. But other than that, YCSs almost always hit the cap. This year it was like 2,500, so maybe some more players. I think the biggest one we've had was the year before that in London, which was, I think, over 3,000 registered. But then again, also it's also always venue dependent, right? So if your venue isn't big enough for more than 2,000 players, then you can't have more than 2,000 players.
Yeah. So you can't really say that not a lot of players are playing the game, for sure.
Definitely no.
So maybe we talk a little bit more about then this like meta that we had in this year in Yu-Gi-Oh! And also these decks that were winning, because I think from what we talked about before, it was a nearly tier 0 format, and that also leads to less variance in the game. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so usually I am a big fan and a big believer of tier 0 formats, so that they are like the pinnacle of competitive play. There is, of course, many different opinions on that, and I have been getting a lot of shade for for voicing my opinion on liking tier 0 formats. But this year I want to say that the tier 0 format went on a little bit too long for my liking. So tier 0, for anyone who doesn't know it, means that there's basically one deck that is so much better than the rest of the competition that, if you're playing at a tournament, it's going to have a top cut attendance rate of at least 50%, which in big top cuts is crazy. So if you have, like, because not everyone is also playing the deck, so it has a good conversion rate as well in the tournament. And this basically we had so much Snake Eye, I mentioned the deck earlier this year, and it just continued to perform. It wasn't really hit by any Forbidden and Limited list, or no other crazy good deck came out. That at some point it became a little stale. Then we also had other decks introduced, like the 10-pie strategy, which then started topping a lot, not as much as Snake Eye, but also a lot, and Duel, an old anime deck, that also ended up winning the World Championships, because there we had like also a little bit of a different Forbidden and Limited list, where the Snake Eyes was a little bit hit, and of course a tournament like Yu-Gi-Oh! Worlds with, I think, 27 participants also plays differently. This is not one of those tournaments where you try to bring a consistent deck because you know that you have to perform over 12 rounds. You're trying to high roll those tournaments, right? So you're playing the deck with the highest ceiling. That was not Snake Eye in that case. But yeah, usually I'm a big fan of T0 formats. I really liked Snake Eye in the beginning. I also picked it up and played it a fair bunch. But after some point, it's nice if it changes. So I said this before our interview here as well. I don't have a problem of playing an entire year of Tier 0 as long as the Tier 0s change up a little bit, So I could play 4 different Tier 0 decks over a course of a year, and I would pretty much enjoy this.
Yeah. So this Tier 0 topic is pretty controversial because some players really like it, some players really dislike it. But it's nice now to hear your opinion on this. Also from a caster's perspective, I think it's also something to consider, right? Yu-Gi-Oh! Is such a huge game that we have like nearly 10,000 cards, or is it over 10,000 cards? Do you know that exactly?
It's more now. So a few years ago, the card 10,000 rank was released. So that was like the 10,000th card that we got.
Crazy, yeah. So there are a lot of options in Yu-Gi-Oh! And also it is not only like the physical TCG that we can play in Yu-Gi-Oh! It's also Master Duel. And I want to come to that next because I think really, like at least from my point of view, I see a lot of Master Duel content online. And also I'm aware that in the World Championship, Master Duel is his own thing. So maybe you can just let us know, like in the beginning, for everyone that doesn't really know about Master Duel, what the basics are, what Master Duel really is, and then we come to like the separate formatted worlds.
Yeah, sure. Master Duel is a free-to-play online version of Yu-Gi-Oh! It has a separate Forbidden and Limited list, and it has different sets than what the TCG has. So you can earn gems by doing quests, summon 5 synchro monsters and then you get 50 gems. You can buy packs from those gems. And of course, you can spend money. You actually don't really have to. Like the beginning quests that you get when you make a new account, they're enough to get like a decent, very good deck, a top tier deck, I want to say. And you can also always play like fun events that they have on the site to earn more gems. And yeah, separate Forbidden and Limited list, so it adapts a little bit to what's happening in the TCG. It's a middle ground between the OCG and the TCG, so what they're doing in the Asian regions, because there they always have more sets than us. And yeah, the game has its own tournament series, the Challenger Cup series, and also has a spot at the World Championships.
So when we talk about the World Championship, how really does Master Duel like changed up the world's format? Because I think also from what I've seen in Master Duel, you're not only really competing on your own, there are also like team cups going on, right?
Yeah, that is absolutely amazing to us, and it's probably the coolest way to watch Yu-Gi-Oh! Was watching the Master Duel Worlds. I absolutely enjoyed it this season. We did a German watch party on the official German Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTube channel. And it was so much fun. So basically, 3 duelists are in a team. They had to, one of them had to qualify over a different tournament series, the DC Cups. I don't know if there's any other way to qualify. There's probably another tournament series for that. But one player has to qualify, and then he brings 2 friends or 2 other duelists that are extremely talented. And then you have to split your cards over those 3 duelists. So basically, you have to use every duelist gets 2 decks that they get to choose from every round, and they only have 3 cards that they can share with each other.
Oh, okay.
Or maybe it's actually just 2. I haven't qualified for Worlds, so I need to do it work that. But basically, the best card in Master Duel arguably is Maxi, which is a card that lets you draw every time your opponent special summons, which happens a lot. So you get a lot of draws. And basically, if you resolve it and your opponent doesn't OTK you that turn, it's a very high chance that you win. There's even data for that. So most likely, everyone is going to have that on their deck. And then probably another staple card, something that can stop Maxi, most of the time, and then you have to run 6 different decks, and they all play at the same time. You're going to play a best of 5 in games amongst the entire teams. So when they're playing at the same time, the first round is like a 2-1 or a 1-2 or a 3-0. And then you just have to, your team just has to win 2 more games if you lead 2-0. So you're not playing a best of 5 with your opponent, but you're playing every opponent on the opposing team. And your team just has to get more wins there.
Yeah. All right. So that is really in contrast to what happens in the TCG, right? So also to consider for those players who are good at both games, you can't really compete at both at the same time, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know if Joshua Schmidt was qualified for both last year, but he was very, very close. I think he was playing in the TCG Worlds playoff, but also made it to the Master Duel Worlds. And yeah, I mean, in the end, he played Master Duel. I think he was only close to getting to TCG Worlds again, which he participated in 3 times already, which is insane when you consider that it's only under 30 players from the entire world. But yeah. He got a good team with another German player, Enrique Zilatas, and a Dutchman, Quanto Thing, Jack, and yeah, they crushed it. They won Worlds eventually. It surprisingly is kind of a team game, Yu-Gi-Oh. You can see the team appeal of it. 3v3 also has some YCSs over in North America in the regions, and people enjoy that a lot. So if you looked at Yu-Gi-Oh! And you thought this was a solo single-player game or 2-player game, that's not necessarily true. There is a big team aspect in building decks and discussing during the games, because the more complex the decks get, the more the approaches of the players vary to playing the game.
Yeah. And also, like, Worlds is kind of the next big topic that we are jumping into right now, right? So Worlds for Yu-Gi-Oh! Is really an elite topic, and also the most elite world championship in a TCG I think that we have at the moment. Tell us a little bit more in detail about like what really makes the Worlds for Yu-Gi-Oh! So appealing, and what also makes it so challenging for the players to be one of those Worlds competitors.
I mean, there is it's I think the hardest TCG event in the world to get into. I'm basing that on just a pure guess, so don't take that. Maybe there is a harder tournament to get into, I don't know. But yeah, the numbers alone, 27 duelists for the TCG from across all continents. So if you're a European player, you have 2 shots of getting to Worlds, which is either getting top 4 at the European Championships, which is always a massive tournament, has been over 2,500 players for years now, and there is also the qualifier, the World Championship grind qualifier. So over the entire season, you get to play regionals and YCSs, nationals and the opens, which are also basically regionals, and OTS store championships. And they give you Worlds points if you top them or get a high placement. And those points accumulate over the year. And at the European Championships, the best 16 duelists of Europe with the highest points, they get together and play another tournament, and 3 duelists of those, they get to they get to go to Worlds. So they play Swiss until 4 duelists left remaining, and then they play 2 semifinals basically. The winner of the semifinals go to Worlds, so they're kind of playing finals. It's an odd one to name it. But then there is also like the last match of 3rd and 4th place, and whoever wins that goes to Worlds, and the other one gets nothing. So this is always the most emotional match to cast, and there's always some tears of joy and tears of despair, I want to say. So that's how you get into Worlds, which is already a crazy system. So if you go to Worlds once in Yu-Gi-Oh, you're a legend of the game. Very few people can say that.
Yeah.
Everyone is watching. It is a whole new format as well. It is always a bridge between the OCG format, the Forbidden Limited List, and the TCG. Cards that are legal in the OCG or have released in the OCG and have it released in Europe also won't be there. So it's an entirely new format. Basically, the combination of the Forbidden and Limited lists is that everything is on there, stays on there from both sides. So if they have cards that are at 3 for us and they are at 1 for them, then they will be at 1 for Worlds, vice versa. So it is a pretty decimated format. And the duelists will have to find something that is gonna get them the win. And this year it was Open Penaranda with Yugioh.
And also, I think at at the World Championship stage, it's not only this like road to getting to Worlds, which is already like one of the like most difficult parts about getting to be a World Championship player in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because you can all the way, like you said, have this OTS tournament at your local store where you can win these points for getting, like, I think only if you place first or second, right? And then all the way up to those bigger tournaments like the YCSs. But then also to prepare for the World Championship itself is something like really different than playing at your local game store or your, for us, it's the European YCSs, right? It's something that you have to prepare really separately. It's not really something that you can rely only on the experience that you had throughout the year. And so it's always interesting to see like what kind of decks also perform pretty well at these World Championships in Yu-Gi-Oh! I remember even like back then, Blue Eyes White Dragon was once winning the World Championship, despite it not really being one of the best decks in the format at maybe your YCS or your locals. But I think this is a challenge for those players taking it on. And also, if we look at it, the OCG and TCG is very different in itself. And it's something that correlates with each other, right? So when we look at the OCGs and the TCG meta, maybe you can give us a little like more information on that.
So the OCG is, when it comes to set releases, about 3 months ahead of us, I would say, maybe a few more. They have newer cards, so we can basically take the information that they have gathered about the formats, look at their deck list that they are running with the new cards that are coming out, and we get a broad overview about how the decks might play and about how the decks might look like for us. There are some format-defining cards in the OCG that we don't have, like, for example, Maxi, which is a card that is also available in Master Duel. I mentioned it briefly earlier. Those change formats as well. So in the OCG, everything was really heavily based around not letting Maxi resolve or play decks that don't lose if Maxi resolves. And in the TCG, we didn't have that at that time, so decks could go way crazier. Because Maxi, again, draws 1 card for every special summon, so decks in the OCG needed a backup plan. If my opponent resolves it, I need to find a way to win the game and build up resources without special summoning a lot. We didn't have that. We could go absolute ham. We could go all in. And that made some decks way better on our side. So there is a tiny bit of a difference in the formats, but most of the time we can see what is going to happen in our format in a few months. But we also get TCG exclusive cards. So I think the best example we ever had was Burning Abyss, which were cards that were released in the TCG, while the OCG didn't have them. That was also a format-defining deck back in 2013, actually. So that was crazy. We had quite some TCG exclusive over the years. Just don't completely remember which one. I think the Dangers might have been TCG exclusive, some Spiral stuff. So there were some pretty decent decks, and they always shake up the format quite nicely. Or not always, but sometimes.
I remember a deck that wasn't shaking up the format, and that was Subterror. I think that was also a TCG exclusive, right?
Subterror? I topped the regional with Subterror, okay? I love Subterrors. I played this before they got the good card. There is a card called Subterror Guru, which made the deck viable. And I played the deck before this card came out. I played it with a funky version, but this was rather a kitchen table player build. You know, when you have a local that is very close to you, you can play those decks at your locals if you don't have to drive an hour to locals, because then you want to bring a probably better deck. So But I love Subterror. It had a very cool mechanic with flipping the monsters upside and or face down and face up again, and then triggering their effects. It was cool. It was fun.
So when we are taking a look at the World Championship, sadly Time Wizard is not a thing that is being played at the World Championship, right? But I want to talk about like Time Wizard in the next. What really you brought up already is that Time Wizard is a loved format already in Yu-Gi-Oh, and it's growing. Even players that just despite us being players for a long time and playing like these old formats, new players even pick up like Time Wizard and enjoy it. And that also means that cards from back in the day hold value and are also sought after. There are even some cards that have seen no reprints yet, but there are also like cards that getting reprints in the last year or the last 2 years. And but Time Wizard is nothing at Worlds, right?
No, and unfortunately not. However, I do understand it.
Yeah.
First of all, OCG and TCG also had different Time Wizard versions, you know. So our beloved 2005 Time Wizard that is called GOAT by the community or Edison, they haven't existed in the OCG. Completely different formats. So at the time it was played. So you can't really mix. I think you could mix it up. You could just play previous Worlds formats. But then again, you would need a whole qualification system for Time Wizard things. I think it would be a cool thing. I don't see it happening personally. Again, I'm not a Konami employee. I have no idea about these things. This is just my personal opinion. But it's also like the formats really don't change anymore. They change a little bit. Like there is some cool new interactions happening sometimes that people haven't found out 10 years ago, and now it's becoming good. But I mean, actually, I mean, it would still be kind of cool to see like as well. Not gonna lie, it's good, but yeah, it's not a thing at Worlds.
Yeah. So Time Wizard in general, there are a lot of options for players. I think I would consider myself a Time Wizard player if I would go to a YCS. I still need to do it. I have my GOAT deck ready. I built it in this year, so I need to go to a tournament in the future and try it out and meet some of those Time Wizard players in person. But how's really the experience going to a tournament and playing Time Wizard? There are different options. I think it's both possible to play like local Time Wizard tournaments, but there is also the possibility to play Time Wizard at bigger tournaments like the YCS or even nationals, I think, right?
Yep. So there's always a big tournament which is called the Ultimate Time Wizard, which is almost another main event. Multiple hundreds of players. It always gets completely capped out. So the people really want to play it. Many people actually just travel for the Time Wizard events. So if there is a YCS in Italy, players from Germany and the UK come over to Italy just to play some Time Wizard. And those events are big. But yes, there's also a local level, regular local scene where people want to play Time Wizard 2010 every week. And that's also beautiful. Those sometimes have higher attendance than the current format.
Yeah, it's crazy to see. Like I think one of the major things drawing me away from Yu-Gi-Oh was even that we couldn't play these old formats. But even just looking at like these deck profiles online or these tournament reports from players that are playing in the YCS and then playing the Time Wizard format, seeing new decks pop up, the meta evolving even in these old formats, that is really showing that it's not really solved yet, and you aren't really just picking up an old deck list from back in the day and then just playing it that way. But I think it's very interesting to see that the creativity is still open, that even new players can thrive in this Time Wizard format. And they also have some great prizes, I think. I mean, it's not really about like going to these Time Wizard events and just going for the prize. But I think it's nice to see that we have some great Time Wizard prizes, and I think it's ranging from like giant cards, right? I think that's the main point that you can win in Time Wizard, right?
Yeah, there's also like some gamettes. I think now we just got the Super Nimble Mega Hamster. Playmat, and the Light and Darkness Dragon playmat is also really, really beautiful. I just played on the Light and Darkness one on Wednesday. Was I just love the card and I love the playmat. But also you said that old cards hold value, and while that is true, like they even spiked up in value. a lot
Yeah.
like old playable cards and high rarities. It is a very, very cheap format to get into because over the course of the years, almost every single card got a reprint. So there is almost nothing that is really expensive.
Yeah.
Some people for the gold format, like you were still thinking about Trap Dust Shot, which is also gonna get a reprint in March finally.
Yeah.
So there's almost everything reprinted. I think you can get like a good Time Wizard deck for 30 euros, 35 maybe. And
Yeah.
then you're going to be good to start your Yu-Gi-Oh career in that regard. And you can go to locals every time. So Time Wizard is just absolute gold.
Yeah. I think the interesting part also to talk about the value of the cards here is I think reprints is a thing that we want to talk about later on in the video, nearly to the end. But I want to bring up reprints here in regards to the Time Wizard format, because when I'm looking at my Gold deck, of course, like I want to get it cheap and then just try out the game. But it's also possible that when I look at my collection, I really like some of these old cards, and I've been loving that. I've seen like the value of those cards, like you said, not only holding value, but some of them are also going up. I mean, that's also the difficult part if you want to get some of those old cards still today. But it's nice to see that really the reprints sometimes that you see today are not crushing the value of the old cards that are being still loved by a lot of players and that are also being played.
And also, I hear sometimes people complaining that you can't, that those old cards are too expensive. You don't need it, okay? It's nice to max out your gold deck, but then it is going to cost you a lot. But that's also okay, because that is just the pinnacle of luxury, right? To bling out your Time Wizard deck completely. So I don't think that is something that people should get upset about. That some of those old cards, like the Magician of Faith of the Champion pack, costs 1,000 euros plus. That's just how it is. And, it's very good that there are cheap alternatives for that.
Yeah. I think when we talk about the pricing here, I want to get back to Worlds actually. I think we didn't cover it. That's the main point, of course. When you go to Worlds 2, it's something that you are being paid to, I think, when you go to Worlds, right? The trip is being paid for by Konami. You are being invited. And then on top, if you get to win the prizes, like maybe we talk a little bit about that. It's not really cash prizes that you're getting at the Yu-Gi-Oh! Worlds, but there are some exclusive prizes there. And what are they exactly? I think it's the same for Master Duel and for the physical TCG, right?
So I think that top 4 get prize cards, which are of course very sought after, and every player gets like exclusive participant sleeves and game mat and some promotional products, which are of course also very sought after.
Yeah. And also like these prize cards, still they are not playable, right? It's just only for the collectability and for the exclusivity.
They differ from YCS prize card. Like those are playable, even though they might not be the greatest cards sometimes, or the most playable cards, which I think is a good thing. But yeah, those cards cannot be used in a duel, as it says on the bottom of the card. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, perfectly said. That's right. So when we're talking about the prizes that you can win at these Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournaments, it's also a pretty good topic to talk about the price to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Too, right? So let's dive into that next. And I think the first thing that we need to start at when we talk about the price of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the price of tournament decks, actually. And that's something that, I've seen quite a bunch of videos online pop up. I also talk about it in regards to Flesh and Blood. But when we look at Yu-Gi-Oh!, I think the range of prices that you need to pay for the decks is like pretty wide, right? You can just basically, depending on the format, of course, range everywhere from 150 euros all the way up to 1,000 euros plus. But how was it really in this year in the format that you described earlier on with this Tier 0 and Snake Eyes?
Yeah, Snake Eyes was pretty expensive upon release already. So the deck was very, very hard to get. And I mean, it just kept on being good for an entire year. So if you invested immediately into Snake Eyes, you had a full year of playing the best deck for a price. for a relatively high price. So I think that was definitely worth it if you invested immediately. It wasn't the cheapest of formats, and I'm gonna say that. But the rogue decks, I mean, you had cheap options. So 10 Pie Dragons, the deck that also top cut a lot, also won a YCS now recently. The deck doesn't cost 100 euros. So there is always budget options. Of course, if you want to play every single deck, if you want to be able to play every single deck in the format at a high competitive level, then there is, of course, the problem that you might need to pay more for some of the decks that are very hard to get. Yeah, there are budget options now that we have. Malchami Fuvalos was a card that caused a kerfuffle in the community because immediately upon pre-sale, the card went for like 130 euros. But then again, many YouTubers made like videos about the card saying, hey, you don't necessarily need it. You can still play at locals and at regionals and top without it. And many players did. If you want to play the YCS, you don't necessarily need to play the cards. There were still players like Dinka Bui who didn't even play it at the YCS. Of course, it's a really good card, and it's nice to have the option to play it. But you don't exactly need it. But also, if you are traveling around the world for your hobby and try to compete at those tournaments, and you consider yourself a competitive player, you can either borrow the cards from someone, or it is worth investing in it. So then the price is pretty high, but yeah, it's something that you have to make up with yourself, right? So there are budget options in the format. Also now you can play a little bit more budget. I don't think that the new decks that have come out are way too expensive. I think they have actually it's something like a Malice Core is at about 200 euros right now, give or take. So I think that's perfectly fine. If you want to add more expensive staples, you have to, but you can, but you don't necessarily have to.
Yeah. And I think that's something that I'm really interested in hearing your opinion on, because you said already a few examples that in these tournaments players came up and didn't really need to play these expensive staples. But do you have like a range of number in mind? Like how, if you look at it at the tournaments in the last year in 2024, like how many players did that? I mean, of course, if you are a pro Yu-Gi-Oh player and you love the game and you invest in it to play, and then you may even want to play these cards. But if you really don't want to play them, it's not really necessary, like you said. How many players, though, do that at the top level, like top 32, top 64? Do you have anything in mind?
So I can't give you data about top 64 of YCS Bologna, but my kitten is, by the way, named after a Yu-Gi-Oh card. This is Crystal Beast Amber Mammoth. In German, it's Kristallungeheuer Bernstein Mammoth, so this is Bernie. So I think that a little bit over half of the duelists of 2,600 or so 1,300 duelists played the Fuvalos card that I just mentioned, and the other half didn't. So even at a YCS level, not everyone is competing with that card.
Yeah, that's interesting to see, definitely. And also you're mentioning that Ding Kabui, for example, I met him once, I think at Spiel, where you also have been working for Konami. And I think it's really interesting to see that also these top players in Yu-Gi-Oh! Sometimes come up and then just change up the script. That's something I really love to see. But let's continue on from coming from those tournament deck prizes all the way up to like this point where I remember Yu-Gi-Oh! From 2016, 17, and 18, where basically it was possible to compete even on a high level with structured decks. And that's something that I'm really interested to hear your opinion on. I remember it like my all-time favorite deck from competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! The Dino Smashers Fury deck. Still one of my all-time favorite cards, the Ultimate Conductor Tyranno. Is that still a thing in Yu-Gi-Oh! Today, or is that something that, was something but is not still anymore a thing?
Yes. Just wait until mid-February when the new Blue Eye Structure deck is going to release.
Yeah.
Didn't mention this earlier to you, but Blue Eyes is going to get massive support with the new structure deck. And this is going to be a very budget deck that players will be able to pick up and compete at a high level. Of course, there are also like some other cards that are already raising in value because they complement the deck really well. Like the new Primite spell cards that just came out in the Ohota set recently. But then it's going to be a hell of a deck. So yeah, there are still very good structure decks releasing. So basically one of the combinations that you played Snake Eye with this year was also the Fire Kings. Fire Kings came out in a structure deck, so that engine was 25 euros if you bought the structure decks online.
Yeah.
And before Snake Eyes was like crazy good, you could just buy 3 of those structure decks, throw in a few other cards, and top a YCS with it. So
Yeah.
there is many instances where structure decks still work, and you don't have to pay a lot of money at all.
Yeah. So also getting a little bit nostalgia here when I think about like these old decks. Of course, I can't tell about these decks that you're talking about now, but I remember it was pretty nice to just buy these 3 Dino structure decks. Even looking at the Monarch structure deck, that was also a thing back then. And I still love to just look up gameplay of those decks and look at some of the cards. I don't think really that Monarch and Dinos is a thing anymore, right? But I remember you messaging me in the last year, or was it in the year before, that Dinos was getting some support and even was like a deck that came back shortly.
I mean, Dinos is not necessarily an archetype. It's like just a general type in the game. So actually, they get more and more support over time. And I'm like right now in the latest set, Crossover Breakers, Yugioh was released, which is also like a little archetype that as an engine complements the Dino deck quite well. So there's always going to be like Ultimate Conductor Tyrella is always going to pop up here and there, and Ornithine Oviraptor. But Monarchs not so much. Cards like Pantheism sometimes see some play in cool Master Duel decks. Now that Masterpiece, the true Draco Slaying King, is at 3 in Master Duel as well. Some of the Monarch cards see play. But yeah, Monarchs have a special place in my heart. I remember YCS Remini in 2000, I think it was 16, where Remini was like at the beach in the summer and everyone was partying and having fun, and you basically went there with the Yu-Gi-Oh community and hung out at the beach for a week. And there we didn't do too much playtesting, and then I decided to just run the main Monarch because it was way the easiest deck. I went was 42nd place after Swiss and top 32 get into top card. It was a bit unfortunate, but really loved the deck.
Yeah, those were the old good times, that's for sure. But when we are looking at these structure decks, it's also something that I see like friends of mine who are only playing like casually at the kitchen table, picking up and then just jamming games with. And also I think kitchen table TCG in general is a big thing in Yu-Gi-Oh, right?
Yeah, so I also participate in kitchen table shenanigans. I don't have any specific decks for the kitchen table, but I have a cube. So I don't know, maybe you know cube from other card games, but I have jammed together like 400 or 600 cards even, and then we draft with those. So Yu-Gi-Oh is not a TCG, or the new Yu-Gi-Oh sets, not a TCG made for drafting with the cards necessarily, I think. Again, my personal opinion. And then you just put your own cards together. You shuffle them through, give everyone a stack of 60 cards, shuffle them into stacks of or piles of 15, and then you start drafting with those 15 piles. And that is a lot of fun with your friends. So kitchen table Yu-Gi-Oh is big. Also, there are so many different deck themes or archetypes in Yu-Gi-Oh that basically everyone can play kitchen table Yu-Gi-Oh. So if there is something you like about TCGs, you will find it in one or the other Yu-Gi-Oh deck. And then you can just pick that one up. Maybe it's not enough to participate at a high level, but that's not what kitchen table Yu-Gi-Oh is about, right? So there is something for everyone in Yu-Gi-Oh, and that's quite beautiful. And this is also why kitchen table Yu-Gi-Oh is still very popular, I think.
Yeah, I think Yu-Gi-Oh has this like not only nostalgia feeling for a lot of people, but then also it is quite interesting to dive into a big card pool, right? And then just see like what you can do with the cards that you have at your disposal.
Yeah.
And also, I think like kitchen table TCG in general, not only for Yu-Gi-Oh, is something that is sometimes really undermined by the fact that when you are in this competitive bubble and you are really talking to a lot of those competitive players, that you can forget actually. And that's something I talk a lot about, like this with these competitive players, with casters like yourself. And then like kitchen table TCG suddenly is under the table actually.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to bring it up definitely in this video because when we talk about the position that Yu-Gi-Oh has in this new TCG era, it's important to know that there are a lot of casual players in Yu-Gi-Oh playing the game and having fun at the kitchen table just with their friends, maybe even from back in the day from the schoolyard, or maybe even new players that are just trying out some of the more simple decks. And like you said, Yu-Gi-Oh has like a very, very big card pool. And so there are also a lot of options that you can choose from the decks. And then building a Yu-Gi-Oh deck, it's kind of different from, TCGs like Disney Arcana or Magic the Gathering, where you are tied to like this color that you're choosing. But in Yu-Gi-Oh, it's kind of different. Like maybe you can talk about a little bit more from the kitchen table TCG standpoint in that regards.
Yeah, so first of all, sometimes games are just supposed to be fun, right? Not everything is necessarily a competition. As something I tend to forget a lot. Like even if I'm playing at the kitchen table with my friends in draft, I do want to win. And if I just want to go for, sometimes I draft fun combinations that I don't think are necessarily good. I have to really convince myself. It's like a very very tough choice for me to go for the fun route instead of the winning route. And I don't know, maybe this is a toxic trait of mine, but I don't hate it too much. It's still all games, right? But yeah, other TCGs have a fewer card pool. I mean, Disney Arcana just got released. You can't compare the sheer card pool. There are like rainbow playstyles of Lorcana, so where you can just mesh every card together in draft or in sealed. So there's definitely alternate rule sets that you can have. I think the same works for Magic as well. I mean, you are legally allowed to play every single color
Definitely.
in your decks, and that is also something that sometimes works. So my partner just recently, when we played some sealed Magic the Gathering, she just played 5 colors and beat me with it from time to time. So, I mean, those decks tend to be less consistent, but there's also something called mana fixing in Magic the Gathering, where you're playing something like treasures, or something that generates treasures, and treasures basically sacrifice themselves to add mana of any color. That's how you get your mana fixing, so you can play every single card in your deck. So there's also big card pools there, but yeah, in Yu-Gi-Oh, it's just, especially with the older cards that aren't as fixated on themes, you can throw everything together that you can find from older sets, and you basically have a halfway working deck, which is just kind of fun. Of course, it's better to look over the cards that you're throwing together so that you have
Sure.
for fusions, you have matching pieces, or you don't have any restrictions that don't lock you out, because this is like a very common way of balancing Yu-Gi-Oh! There's not a mana balance or anything, or a color balance, as you said. There is sometimes restrictions on the cards, which also makes it important to read your cards carefully, which is something I am absolutely guilty of as well, to just skim over the cards and then completely forget about the important restrictions of the cards. But yeah, there's so many different ways to play Yu-Gi-Oh! I mean, for the longest time, I think up until from 2002 until 2010, there were decks that were just called good stuff, because it's just good cards thrown together and it worked. No theme, just vibes, no plan, just trying to win. There's still kind of decks like that emerged again. I want to say, I don't think you can call it good stuff. That recently there was like a deck that consisted of multiple small engines like Fiendsmith and Kashtira with just a bunch of hand traps. It was no big combo that you did. It was just some resources that you build up. Of course, can't compare it to normal summon monster pass, but no big overarching combo, but just small good combinations of cards that work together quite well. It's very nice that you can see this in the game again.
Yeah. So when we come from that possible like kitchen table TCG view, it is also nice and I think important to see that reprints are also good, of course, for the kitchen table TCG player, but not only for the kitchen table TCG player. It's also important for those competitive players who want to go to YCS. And I think it's very interesting to take this comparison to other games where reprints are handled differently. But let's talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! For a second, and I know you have a strong opinion on that, where reprints are happening in the game. What's your opinion on that?
I like it a lot. So it is cool if every single card is available to everyone. I think it makes the field more fair. I know that some people are mad that their cards don't hold the value as much. So Fuvalos just got released, I think, a month or two ago. And they already announced that in March. I think in the last quarter century set, they're going to reprint Fuvalos. And some people were voicing their opinion on that. Most of the people loved it. But then again, I think this is a hobby, and especially in competitive play, cards shouldn't be investments in your, like financial investments in your future. So I think this is an approach that many people are taking on card games ever since we had the pandemic, where cards raised in prices and some cards became kind of investments, just like stocks. But I don't think they should be. I think it's a card game, and it's beautiful that we can play it. And I like it that we have fast reprints so that everyone can play those cards if they are too sought after. So this is something I really, really support.
So I think when it comes to reprints, it is, of course, like one of the times where when you didn't have the card and you see a reprint is announced, that's something good for you, right? Just straight out of the park, like no complaints, I think. Then there are these players that you already mentioned, which are the ones that invested into the cards, and then maybe like they are upset because, of course, the value of a card that is being reprinted is dropping in price. But then also, I think the question is, like you said, is it really like an investment? I mean, you are spending a lot of money on other hobbies where you don't really get the money back also. And I think it is also important to know that when you are getting into the game as a new player and you can't really afford any of the cards, that this is also a bad thing that happens, right? And I think in Yu-Gi-Oh! At least you have the option to not only play a cheap deck from the past, but also being pretty certain that you can get the cards that are new to the game in the near future. You don't really need to wait like 3 years to get a card that is being put out in the game now.
Yeah, that is just, in the end, gatekeeping your players. And unfortunately, you mentioned this earlier, that in Flesh and Blood there is very few reprints. And
that's true, yeah.
Well, this is nice if you're like a day oneer and you are playing the game from the start, your cards hold value. That is an incredible thing to happen to you. But not everyone starts from the beginning, right? So if you have missed out on the first set of cards and you want to start a game and all of a sudden it costs like an endless amount to start the game, that is going to be a bit tough. In Yu-Gi-Oh! Most of the staples are affordable, so that's a good thing. Of course, there is cards like Fuvalos or Beamul, Charmy, Perulia that are a bit more on the expensive side, but you can still play without those, and there is like still ways to play the game. I can imagine that it's also the same for Flesh and Blood, so there are not absolutely necessary cards that you need. Without them, you can't compete at locals even. I don't know.
Yeah, this is true. There.
Yeah. But there's always ways to start playing the game. If you want to pick up a game and you are willing to invest like 800, 900 euros immediately, then money also doesn't seem to be an issue for you there. But I think that if you're starting a new hobby, then start slowly, right? Don't throw your money at it immediately. Get to know the game, and then you can see how serious you want to take it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you mentioning Flesh and Blood, that's something that I spend a lot of time on. That's like the main TCG that I spend my time in. And like for a long time, I thought like, okay, reprints are just straight up bad, right? Because not only because they are crushing the value, but also like there are so many copies out of it, right? And so that also like leads to the market then, yeah, holding the value down actually. But I think now that I've been for 3 years in Flesh and Blood actually, and I've seen that certain cards are not really reprinted, I was taking a step towards the other side too. And now that I wanted to bring it up in this video, definitely, is that of course for the players that are having the cards and they are holding value, that's nice. But I'm not really sure if that's the way that it should be always. I think like definitely if you're getting reprints, then that's good for the new players that want to actually join the competitive scene. But I think on the other side too, it's the question of how competitive do you really want to take it? Because if you think you're one of the best players and you want to compete at those high stakes tournaments, then you maybe really want to take the money and invest. It's not an investment that it holds value, but get the money and play the game that you actually like. And then it doesn't really matter if like the card is being reprinted in the future, I think. Definitely a very, very difficult topic, I think. It also, I think, is something very difficult to talk about in regards to the player base, right? Flesh and Blood is a much like smaller game compared to Yu-Gi-Oh, of course. And I'm really interested to see like how those reprints are going in Flesh and Blood in like 5 or 10 years, because I assume like if certain staples are staying in the game, they also need to reprint the cards from time to time, because then basically like copies are not available on the market anymore. And I can't speak for 2025 as the time of recording the video, but maybe we see reprints in the future too. For example, we just got announced like that we get gem packs in Flesh and Blood, and that's something that also Yu-Gi-Oh inspired, right? With the OTS tournament packs, for example. And I think like even that is something nice that Yu-Gi-Oh still has, going to local tournaments and then just being able to win like these small packs at your locals.
Yeah, those have always been amazing. So there's always like reprints of some old cards that have never seen reprints in years.
Yeah.
That have started to become a little bit more valuable, even though they weren't really sought after for years, than some of rather good cards that reprints that haven't had too many that are like still necessary today. And some cards get rarity upgrades. That is really cool. So you can bling out your deck or get some old cards into rotation again. So this is the OTS packs. They have a great purpose. I love those.
Yeah. I also want to come to the point that you said like a lot of people are like investing on these card games. And I think even though it's nice for the companies if people just buy up the product and want to invest in it, I think it's really, from my personal opinion, something that you just shouldn't do. Like I even, how do you say it in English? I was guilty to do that in the past. And I think really, if you try that, like I can't stop you from doing that. But at least if you want to, see someone talk about this from another perspective than just saying like trading cards is a good investment, there are videos on the Fabled Academy that you can check out for that. But Leo, let's come to 2025 actually. I think the outlook here, talking about it at the end of the video, is pretty important in the podcast actually, because hopefully until the time this comes out, I have set up Spotify and so on too. But let's talk about 2025. You mentioned a new set being released already. It's called Crossover Breakers, right?
Yeah. So a few weeks ago, I went to London to the head office of Konami, and then we did like a preview on the different decks that come out. It's a deck builder set for the decks Ryuge, Malice, and Ryziel. So we did some explanatory videos on those and had a little pack opening, which was really cool for me because the set wasn't released yet and I got to open a box. It was incredibly fun. But Malice and Ryziel especially took over the meta by storm, together with a new Forbidden Limited list that basically got some hits for Snake Eye as well, which is nice to see. So the meta shifted towards Ryziel and Malice. I think they are going to set a tone on how the game is played for a few months. People really enjoyed the format already. I don't know yet if it's just that there is a big change now and they enjoy that. but the playstyle is also very much. It feels very time with it. So in other games, in mana-based games, we would describe those decks as mid-range.
Yeah.
So you don't set up a too big field that is going to win you the game immediately, which is in Yu-Gi-Oh! Combo decks. It is not a trap-based deck necessarily, so this is what we call control, to stop your opponent from playing. It's setting up something on the field, setting up some resources in the hand for the next turn, and then trying to win a rather slower game, and basically also controlling it, trying to let your opponent play a little bit, but stop their resource management at the most important turns, or stopping them from going for a big push. And those decks play very, very healthily. You can play both in a very, very chill variant, basically. There is some resource-heavy engines that are also being played in those decks at the moment, and people love it. Like, especially the higher skilled players that I've talked to, they enjoy it quite a lot. They're very happy with those decks, and you can already see at the German Open that like the top 8 cut was incredibly stacked, and that's always a good sign for TCGs. So this is like a rule of thumb, for me at least, is that when there are many big names that are great players are in the top cut, you know that there is a very high skill component to the format right now, because there is variance in card games. It's part of the fun. There's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
But if the better players consistently win, that's a form of skill expression from the format. And people are, me at least, and high competitive players are very hyped about Ryziel and Malice. Another thing, even though the numbers are leading up to a tier 0 format between those two decks, the decks aren't unbeatable. They are the best at what they're doing, but there's plenty of rogue strategies that can beat those decks, and it doesn't feel too overwhelming what the decks are doing. So they are the best decks at the moment, but they are not so crazy hard the best decks that it gets super frustrating to play against those.
Yeah.
So I'm very much looking forward to the competitive year of 2025. We have very cool releases ahead as well. We have cool reprints. Fuvalos reprint immediately is awesome. I love this. We have the Blue Eye structure deck that is going to come out right after YCS Birmingham. Would have loved to see it at Birmingham, to be honest, but it's also cool that we have like the Ryziel and Malice format for that one. And yeah, other than that, I don't think that anything is known about the upcoming year, anything crazy. But this is all things I'm very much looking forward to, so I'm hyped.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to viewing the structure deck that you talked about, the Blue Eye structure deck actually myself after this.
Dragon Rulers also get insane support.
I saw that, yeah.
Insane support. So this is also an instance of the old cards gaining value again. Like not necessarily old cards, like there was Quarter Century Bonanza coming out. Have you bought the set, Alex?
No.
Because this is something I think that you would absolutely enjoy. I will have gotten a box for Christmas when this podcast airs. And so this is basically old cards in high rarity with some reprints of newer cards, which is very, very cool. And I've opened a few packs already. It's so much fun to open them. And I have no idea where I was going with this. All right, the Dragon Rulers came out in Quarter Century Rare and like an Ultimate Rare and stuff like that. And those immediately skyrocketed in price.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's at first I thought it was crazy to seeing the Dragon Rulers back because I only heard about it, right? I didn't play the format myself, but people were just like, these cards are just too crazy, they're too good. But I saw during the year, even early on, some of them were coming off the ban list, right? I think they were going to 1, I think, or to 2, I don't know. But yeah. I bought like Tempest and the blue dragon. What's it called? Tempest and Tidal. Yeah, those two I really wanted. So I bought these 2 early on, but then I saw like now they're at 3, I think, even, right?
Also the little ones are at 3, so the full engine is available now. And the funniest thing is they're all level 7. and level 7s are now a very, very generic engine to play level 3 decks with, funnily enough. So there's like the Tenpai strategy and Malice, they have a bunch of level 3 monsters, and you can access all of those by having 2 level 7 monsters on the field, because there's a combo where you overlay them for Exceed Summon of Dracossack. You probably know Dracossack as well, like the old Train Ruler Exceeds monster. And you have 2 level 3 tokens because of that, and you can link those off into Cherubini of the Burning Abyss that sends a level 3 monster from your deck to the graveyard, and then you can go into a link 3 of Promethean Princess that summons back a fire monster from the graveyard. That is going to be a Hydra from the Tenpai Dragons, and then you're on your Tenpai engine. Or you can go into Malice combos by sending the Malice cards and then go into Haggard Lizardos and banishing them from the graveyard. So level 7 monsters, incredibly generic engine if you're playing with level 3 decks. Got a little bit too specific there, I'm sorry.
All right, that's okay. I want to mention also, like you talked about Ryziel. I did a podcast with Kang, and he is a pretty critical, right, to Yu-Gi-Oh! But he even mentioned that he is excited about Ryziel and that he even wants to play some games with it. So I think that's a good sign, right? Let's also talk about the YCS Birmingham for a second here, because YCS Birmingham, I think, is in the early on in February, or when is it?
Yeah, I think the 8th or 9th, or 8th and 9th.
Yeah. So that is basically like the first big event in 2025 that players have the possibility to gain like an access to the World Championship too, right? But we don't know about the World Championship yet.
No, exactly. So, I mean, you just get like points again. Yeah, for regionals, of course, also before that to gain some points. But of course, YCS are always a little bit bigger. And no infos yet about Worlds, I believe. Yeah, so Birmingham, first YCS, get some valuable World Championship points. The grind is already on. There's no direct qualification there.
Yeah. And then also I want to talk here at the end, like my last point is like this format change, right? You talked about it in 2024 with Snake Eyes, this long tier 0 format. And what are you really hoping for 2025?
So I'm hoping for some more diversity in the format than we had last year. So of course I like tier 0 formats, but I'm also in the end it shifted also more to a rather open format, but with the same decks that we've had for a longer time. I'm hoping that we get some more change in the next year. But I hope that the power level of Ryziel and Malice, that this one continues, because I really, really enjoy how those decks play and the power level that these decks provide. Because something also that I wasn't too happy with is that basically every one card could OTK in the last year, basically. So every one card engine starter could slam out an OTK easily. Like play through fields and then OTK after that. And it was very, very easy to win games. And I like that this is not the case right now. I like that if you have a bad first turn, you will probably get a second one as well. So that is something I am hoping for the next year, that we have a lot of back and forth, and then actually you can just play whatever deck you want as long as there is a lot of interaction.
Also, here at the end, I want to know your opinion on this variance thing, right? The variance, sorry for my English, guys. Like talking from the pro player perspective here at the end, right? What does this like new format mean for new players prepping for the big tournaments, but also like how they play the game? Yeah,
so this is something I wanted to mention earlier, but we kind of skipped over it, so I'm happy that you mentioned this again. In tier 0 formats, as a competitive player, it's much easier, much more comfortable to prepare for those tournaments because you know what you're going to face off against most of the time, so you can even prepare your main deck for it or prepare a big part of your side deck for those top 2 decks. You can try and make great meta reads by finding side deck cards or main deck cards even that beat both decks at the same time, so that you can have an edge in the tournament. If there's too much variance, then in a tournament, it's hard to prepare your side deck. It becomes a bigger matter of luck how far you advance in the tournament, because if you are preparing for 4 decks at once and you play against the 6th or 7th deck in the meta, because you just have 15 side deck slots and 40 cards in the main deck, your engine is going to be a big part of your main deck, then you might just lose some games by default, just because your deck isn't prepared for it, and that always feels a little bit worse. Then again, for local level, I love bigger variants. If you're there to have just fun with local people and to play some Yu-Gi-Oh, and you're not necessarily there to win all of it, and you don't have this competitive drive that you have to win this, it's, I think, more fun to play against 5 different decks, and everyone has their own pet deck. So that's a cool thing. But for competition, and I'm a caster, I'm a competitive player, I love those formats with very low variance, so you know what you're going to face up against, and you know how to prepare for the tournament.
Also, it's preparation for a caster too, right? Are you casting the YCS Birmingham?
Yes, and that is indeed a very, very, very important aspect, because I like it when I can do deep dive into some decks and play a lot with those decks, and then I'm prepared for most of the rounds. Of course, we're also going to feature rogue decks, but then again, most of the time you feature the rogue decks, it's also going to be easier because they're against the deck that you know really well. You can easier spot like the different choke points or the different advantages that the rogue decks bring to the table versus the established decks. So this makes commentating more easy. Also, that's the reason why I really like Ryziel and Malice, because there's not these very long combos. Because as a commentator, sometimes it gets harder to commentate over these, because most of the time people know what's happening, and if the combo takes a while, it's kind of hard to fill the gap, because I don't want to just read out the spreadsheet for everyone, you know? So that is much cooler. If the combo is a little bit quicker, and then you're like, okay, and now player 2 gets to do his interactions, and you can do more predictions. That's very cool. But lesser variety is very cool as a caster, because we will find the cool decks at a tournament. We will find the rogue strategies, and then we can see how they apply in the meta, and that is always something I find really fun.
And in Yu-Gi-Oh, like we talked about, there are so many decks. It's not only we're talking about 20 decks that possible can be picked up, but there are hundreds of decks actually that you could talk about.
And in those very broad formats with a lot of variance, the crazy decks that we're featuring, usually they're not the strongest. Like, usually they're so niche that I sometimes haven't read a single card of the deck, because there are just so many cards, and then casting becomes really difficult if you have no idea what's happening. It's always, I mean, it's also kind of fun, because you just see how the players have cooked. But for me, I like to do deep analysis in the matches, and that gets me more hyped. So I like those. I like those thoughts with low variance.
Also, like for the players, I'm really excited to see in 2025. I'm following a few of the names already, but I'm very excited like what kind of players will take it to the World Championship. And also, like, there is Jonas Koschel coming up on the Fabled Academy podcast in the future as well.
That's very cool.
We already talked about it, and he is a former World Championship competitor. I'm not really sure like how much he's investing his time into Yu-Gi-Oh at the moment, but we will talk about it in the future episode. I can't tell if it's the next or the next 5 episodes. I'm not sure. But he will definitely be on in the future. And maybe you see also other Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro players here on the Fabled Academy podcast, alongside those Flesh and Blood Pro players and the Magic Pro players that I'm talking to. I think it's pretty exciting to see just all the different TCGs that are coming in this year, and how players, those pro players, are tackling those. That's also why I thought it's so interesting to talk about Kang's experience in Yu-Gi-Oh! And then going to Disney Lorcana. So yeah, it's definitely a super exciting year in front of us for being a TCG player.
Yeah, so Jonas is a great interview guest. I've talked with him a lot of these. He's also played my cube with me already. And also kind of very critical of Yugioh, but he's like a strict but loving father, with a firm hand, because he's only criticizing the game a lot because he loves it so much.
Yeah.
His words, and also mine. But yeah, I'm also looking forward to hear what the other TCG people you have on your podcast are gonna have to say. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, Leo, thank you so much for taking the time. It was super nice to get to catch up before Christmas. Actually, it's just 2 days before actually the Christmas evening, and so I'm happy we got to meet each other again in 2024 and leading the first podcast here on the Fabled Academy.
Perfect. Also, just for context for everyone, we started at 8 a.m. on a Sunday today.
That's true. Yeah.
The feeling that we are sleepy, we are.
I hope you are not listening sleepy to this, but anyway, thanks so much for tuning in until the end here. And if you want to see a new podcast, there's someone on the screen that you can click on now.